Okay, my name is Raymond Lotta. I want to welcome everyone to today's program. We're going to start with a wonderful video.
How can I tell you my truth, little one? How can I tell you the things I have done? Though I cannot see the sky, I only think of you. And you shine for me more brightly than the sun. And how can I tell you the tears I have shed? Are you still lonely each night in your bed? I could tell you to forget me, but the words would not be true. And I love you always, even if you do. I am weakness, I am mother. We are part of one another. I am stronger and more hopeful than it seems. And my story is your story that I sent you from a prison with 1,000 tender kisses for your dreams. For the mothers and the daughters and the children, I am strong. I am weakness, I am mother. We are born of one another. I am stronger and more hopeful than it seems. And my story is your story that I sent you from my prison with 1,000 tender kisses for your dreams. This is my story with love, Nasrin.
My name is Raymond Lotta. I want to welcome you to today's program. Free Nasrin and all Iran's political prisoners, heroism for our times. I'm on the staff of Revolution Books in Harlem. I'm a political economist and writer for revcom.us and an advocate for the new communism developed by the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian. Revolution Books is very proud to host today's program. We are a bookstore about the world for a radically different world. We are a bookstore where the whole world comes first. We began with this wonderful video. It was the theme song to the documentary Nasrin, and it was performed by Angelique Kidjo, and the title of that song was How Can I Tell You? Well, today our 5 speakers will be telling of the defiant and courageous journey of Nasrin Sotoudeh, the Iranian lawyer and human rights activist who has been sentenced to decades in prison. Our speakers will be telling of the larger struggle of the people of Iran against a repressive regime, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the oppressive society that they live in. They'll be telling of the ways in which you can take up this campaign, this struggle in defense of these political prisoners, and to say no to US war threats and sanctions against Iran. We here in the United States have a special internationalist responsibility to stand with those in Iran who are standing up against and fighting this regime, and to make common cause with people across the world who are fighting for a better world. And this is especially true given the fact that the US imperialism, has long dominated the Middle East and has a bloody history of domination over Iran. In 1953, the CIA engineered a coup to overthrow a democratically elected regime. It installed the regime of Shah Pahlavi, which ruled horrifically for more than a quarter century. And in 1978, 1979, when the people of Iran rose up to overthrow the Shah, the US and the Western imperial powers assisted in the coming to power of the theocratic regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran. At the same time, there is a proud and blood-stained history of resistance by the people of Iran to throw off the yoke of foreign domination and to put an end to these oppressive regimes that have long ruled over them. And as I speak, US warships are in the Persian Gulf, and the US is imposing terrible sanctions on the people of Iran, denying them of needed medicines and food. In the last few years, there has been an upsurge of the Iranian people, and the regime has responded with a wave of savage repression directed against a broad swath of the Iranian population: writers, artists, poets, labor activists, women's activists, members of religious minorities, members of the national minorities like Arabs and Kurds, and against revolutionaries who are fighting to put an end to this regime and to create a society and world in which there is no longer oppression and exploitation. As the statement of solidarity, no to US sanctions and no to US war, free all Iran's political prisoners states, the regimes of Iran and the United States have their national interests, but we, the people of the US and Iran, have our shared interests. And right now, that demands of us to stand with and defend these political prisoners in Iran. So we're going to begin the program now by hearing from the two makers of the documentary, Nasrin. We have Jeff Kaufman. Jeff is the writer, director, and co-producer of the film, and he has made documentaries and short films for the History Channel and the Discovery Channel, and his documentary about the playwright Terrence McNally was nominated for an Emmy. And we have with him Marcia Ross, and Marcia is the co-producer of the film, and she has been a casting executive for the Disney Studios and for Warner Films, and her film and TV credits include Clueless and Murder in Mississippi. So we're very proud to have the two people responsible for this film and making this film to now make a presentation about that film, about the experience of it, and about Nasrin Sotoudeh. So I'm going to hand it over to our two first speakers. And let me just say that I encourage everyone in the audience to send in their comments and questions through Facebook. Um, and also, you can do that in chat, and you can send in any comments as well by email to revbooksnyc@yahoo.com. That's REV books NYC@yahoo.com. So with that, I'm going to hand the microphone and the podium and the stage to Jeff and Marcia. Thank you for being with us, and it's yours.
Let me thank everyone for participating, and thank you, Raymond, as well. In the interest of transparency, give us a nudge when we're supposed to stop talking, and we'll know how to cycle down. I want to pass the mic over to Marcia in just a moment, but first I want to say that it's really special to be with you today. One of the earlier films I did about 10 or 12 years ago, and a film that helped bring Marcia and me together, was about the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem. And that was just 8 blocks up Lenox Avenue, Malcolm X Avenue, from where the Revolution Books is now. It was on 140th and Lenox Avenue. And it was the first place in America where whites and blacks could come together and dance together on the same floor and socialize together without getting arrested or harassed. That idea of people from different communities coming together through the arts and having that change society is something that stayed with me ever since. And it connects very much to what Nasrin Sotoudeh believes in. She loves the arts, and she believes that the arts and politics and social movement all flow together to connect to something that you, Raymond, were just saying a moment ago, that there's a big separation between the people of a country and the leaders of the country, and finding ways for the people of countries to come together and to find common interests and common respect connects to that earlier film, and definitely connects to Nasrin as well, and I think is the way forward for these two countries.
So just to elaborate on something Jeff said, that we felt that so often the country, the leadership of a country doesn't really reflect the people of a country. I mean, we know that in our own country, from what we see, in the newspaper. If you read about this country, it does not reflect all the people that live here. And we think that was true of Iran, as well as many countries are like that. And it's usually what you read in the newspaper. And many Americans also know very little about Iran. And we wanted to sort of shed light on, the culture and the people and sort of the common humanity that we all share as human beings, that is so often not reflected in the saber rattling between two governments, positioning and moving things around. I think, Rem, you also talked about that earlier. So Jeff had made a film called Education Under Fire a number of years ago, I guess about 10 years ago, about the persecution of the Baha'i faith in Iran. And at that time, he was introduced to Nasrin because she was representing people of the Baha'i faith in Iran, which was really interesting because this woman of Muslim faith helping her Baha'i neighbors, as many other Iranians do. It's just not a very well-known story. Kind of stuck with him. And when we were finishing our last film, we started to really think about Nasrin as a subject of a standalone film, because of all that she represented, as a woman, as a lawyer, as a human rights defender and activist, as an Iranian, as a world figure, actually, and what she represents on the world stage. And we also felt, and I think it's true for all our films, that we wanted to sort of bring attention to somebody who maybe people wouldn't know much about. We wanted to tell her story and make sure that it was out there for everyone, so that the history books couldn't rewrite it in the way they wished, that there would be some kind of a living document about this woman and her work. So we approached her in 2016 and her husband Reza, and we started talking to them about whether or not they would be open to this idea. And we had a lot of talks. And I think our biggest concern was her personal safety. We didn't want to do anything that could make things more difficult for her, but she was very open to it and really wanted to pursue making the film, which took us about 3 or 4 years to make.
Let me add something to something you just said, because I thought it was really important. Marcia referenced just in passing, and since we worked together and we're married, I knew what she was saying. And that is, she talked about how history books sometimes erase people who do important work. On the other hand, sometimes history books also pump up people who don't do important work, but want that historical credit or just lucky. So Marcia and I hope you don't mind my interrupting to say this, but Marcia and I did a film a number of years ago called The State of Marriage. And it was about how, especially three remarkable small town lawyers, women, ended up launching the whole marriage equality movement. And two of these lawyers, Vermont lawyers, never got the credit they deserved. And as we were working on this film about these amazing women who changed so many lives, legislatively, personally, politically, there were several books being written about some men who followed about a generation later. And those men were basically, and those books were basically erasing the story of the women that we were doing a film about. It's a scary thing, but that's what can happen. And so shining a light on both Nasrin, but also this remarkable women's rights movement in Iran is just so inspiring for us, and it's a great story, but it's also a chance to carve into the history books. Don't forget the impact of these women. And let's talk a little bit about who Nasrin is and why she's so important. Well, I'll start, and then you interrupt me because I interrupted you. Nasrin Sotoudeh has been an attorney for several decades. She started out, her parents were conservative people, but who also very much empowered her strength and her independence. She started out both working in a bank, but also as a journalist covering human rights and civil rights in Iran, and sometimes being censored because of that. And finally, she realized that her role in life wasn't as a banker. It was in the law. And so she got her attorney's license in Iran, but it took her about 8 years before they would let her practice. She's become, she was sort of mentored by Sharon Abadi, and she was part of this amazing movement of women's rights activists in Iran, but she was also a champion of children's rights, of religious minority rights, including the Kurds and the Zoroastrians and a number of other groups who just don't have the voice and the backing that they deserve. Nasrin tried to give them that. And over and over again, Nasrin put herself on the line, both inside of protests, in courtrooms, with clients who no one else would represent, trying to protect their rights. Sometimes she would win, sometimes she would lose. I remember she told us a story about defending some Baha'i shop owners who had had their stores taken away from them because they were Baha'is, and getting their licenses back. That saves the family. So Nasrin, for us, was and is, and her husband is as well, both this great inspiring story about Iran, but at a time in America where we were so bereft of leaders who could inspire us, she was also someone who pointed us in a path for our country at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting, having started the film in 2016 after the last election. I think so often, when we were making the film and watching what was going on over there, it became, frightening on many levels to see what they're going through and what could possibly happen in this country, which was happening in this country. I was constantly concerned about the loss of civil rights. And you see what happens in societies where people don't have their civil rights, where their voices are suppressed, where the courts and the legal system doesn't hold up, to support the will of the people. It's quite remarkable. And to me, it was really very, very chilling to be living through our own political upheaval here and watching what was happening to her there.
Perhaps you could talk about this one day when we were talking to Nasrin and her husband on FaceTime when they were walking through a park in Tehran.
Well, the last day that we saw her,
yeah.
Which was, so Nasrin was arrested while we were making the film, not because of the film, but for those of you who've seen the film, and for those of you who hope you will see the film, after this program, it's available now, by the way, on Amazon. It's still playing in theaters as well. And we have a website, nasrinfilm.com. And if you go there, you can sign up on our newsletter, and we update regularly with information about the film and Nasrin, and also all the ways that you can actually see the film. So she knew when she took on this case, she was defending these young women. It was called the Girls of Revolution Street movement. And it was the women of Iran who were taking off their headscarves in public to protest the mandatory hijab law. And she started representing these women. And ultimately she was arrested for that. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that could happen. And as Jeff was saying, it was quite something. I mean, one day we were talking to her, she and Reza were in a park and we were on, WhatsApp, FaceTime or whatever. And we're chatting. And then suddenly she was gone for 2.5 years. She has since been out on 2 medical furloughs because she's had a heart condition. And she came out the first time, but she had COVID that she caught in the prison. So she got over that and she went back. She came home again and had the angioplast, and she's doing better in terms of her physical health, but she's not, being in Garshak prison is just a really horrible place and a horrible situation. But she remains really very optimistic really about the future and what, and the fight that she's in. She's really everything. She's one of the most strategic. She's so incredibly strategic, and everything she does is very, thoughtfully laid out. I mean, she's a master chess player. If I do this, this could mean that, and so, she's continuing. Even incarceration, as horrible as it is, to be a strong advocate for people within the prison and to be a role model for people in Iran.
Yeah, let me close with one thing, if I could mention it, which is that, our other guests will be able to talk about other political activists and political prisoners in Iran. This is a very difficult time. I just want everyone, wherever you are, to, look around at your own surroundings and then picture Nasrin, this wonderful, loving mother and wife and activist who is now in a windowless cell in Garchak prison. Garchak prison has been described as a prison with urine on the floor and inadequate food and inadequate air. She's in a windowless cell that's overcrowded, that's so crowded that there's not a bed for each prisoner in her cell, and they have to rotate sleeping times so that for each person, because it's so crowded, and they can't all eat at the same time because it's so overcrowded. She was in Evin prison, and when she was transferred to Garchak prison, like a week later, she got COVID. So it's called one of the most dangerous places in Iran for women. This wonderful person is there at this very moment. And thank God she knows that the outside world cares about her, but there are thousands of other people like her who don't know the world is there for her. And so part of what we can do now is make sure that all of our voices are not just for Nasrin, but for so many others, not just in Iran, but in every country around the world. And we're so glad for this opportunity to talk about it.
Well, Jeff and Marcia, thank you for that introduction to the film and to Nasrin's life. And I must say that, Nasrin Sotoudeh, has special qualities, that are really exemplary in these times. She's fighting and sacrificing for something bigger, than herself, her family, her career, her comfort. And we need more of that in today's world, and especially in this society, in the US, in the belly of the beast. So she is a model in that sense. And the film captures so much of that. And this would be an appropriate time for us to view the trailer to the film so that people in the audience can get a sense of what you've done here and more about Nasrin. And people, as you said, can watch this film. We urge everyone, to view it and to let others know about it. So let's show the trailer to the film that was made by Jeff Kaufman and Marcia Ross, Nasrin.
Nasrin Sotoudeh is a prominent lawyer in Iran who's been fighting for children's rights, women's rights, and human rights.
She is one of the bravest voices in Iran.
She took on cases that other lawyers were too afraid to take on.
We've seen Nasrin Sotoudeh jailed for defending human rights.
It has cost her and her young family a lot.
Protesting against the law which forces Iranian women to wear the hijab.
The country's most prominent human rights activist and a voice for the voiceless.
I had been in Iran maybe a week, and I knew how to toe the line as a woman. And then I meet Nasrin Sotoudeh, who doesn't toe the line at all.
داستان یک عمریه که ما با این مسائل دست و پنجه داریم نرم میکنیم ولی اجازه نمیدیم که باز دست به خون دیگران آلوده کنیم.
On Wednesday, Nasrin Sotoudeh was again arrested. She had been tried and convicted in absentia. According to her husband, she intends to continue her activism from prison.
هیچ جامعه‌ای بدون پرداخت هزینه به هیچ جا نرسیده. همه احزاب، گروه‌ها، افراد آزادانه بتونن تو بحث‌ها مشارکت کنن. اینه که این پرونده برای من اهمیت داره.
There you are. So you buy a ticket, you watch it online, you have a 5-day window, and you can watch it at your convenience. So we're going to go to our next speaker, and that is Dr. Shahrzad Mojab. Dr. Shahrzad Mojab. And Shahrzad is a professor at the University of Toronto. And among her many books are Marxism, Feminism, and Knowledge, and The Art of Resistance in the Middle East. So I'm going to bring Shahrzad to our viewing audience, and we're very excited to hear from you. So Shahrzad, it's yours.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be on a panel with Jeff, Marsha, Karen, Kaveh, and later on to hear a message from Mariam Claren. And I'm also very thankful for the efforts of the Burn the Cage campaign for the free political prisoners in Iran. This is the second time that I'm on a panel with Marsha and Jeff, which has given me another opportunity to reflect on the significance of their documentary, Nasrin, for raising awareness on the struggle of Nasrin Sotoudeh inside and outside the prison for rights in its universal generic form in Iran. But the documentary, for me, has broken a set of silences, historical silences, and then also the international silences. The echo of the magnificent voice of Angelique Kidjo has further pierced this silence. Now, let me focus on the 3 silences that I want to mention here and have a conversation about that. What do I mean by historical silence? As a revolutionary educator, I watch, listen, and read through Nasrin. Now I'm referring to this documentary. 30 years of atrocities committed by the Islamic regime. Nasrin is not the story of a single imprisoned woman of recent years. Nasrin embodies the massacre of political prisoners in the decade of the 1980s in Iran, and known to most, in particular the left and the radical forces in the US and the West. Former political prisoners, their families, and the left in Iran mostly, but lonely, carried the pain and the struggle against what I call the carceral theocratic regime of Iran. Now that we have been given this powerful political educative tool, let's use it to break this historical silence and understand the past as conditions that created the current violent situation. And we need to mobilize internationally at this moment in order to make sure that these atrocities will not be repeated in future. Now, what do I mean by this notion of the international internationalization and mobilization, which I think that this is my second point, that this historical silence is related to the absence of international solidarity. And this absence, it's not related that we don't have the knowledge and we don't know. Let me briefly quote some information and data from the report that was produced by the Arab Center, which is a liberal advocacy group based in Washington, D.C. In their 2018 report, that it is called Political Prisoners in the Middle East, the subtitle is called The Quiet Crisis. I think that it was very loud and deep crisis, but it was quiet because the international community was not paying attention to what was going on. The report warns against, I'm quoting, the increase in the number of political incarcerations by resurgent authoritarian regimes in the Middle East. It indicates that since the collapse of many of the Arab Spring uprisings, repression has been on the upswing. The number of the individuals jailed for dissent, peaceful political activism, or even mild criticism of the state. And I will come back to this point and give you an example during the Q&A if it is necessary, that they have been arrested, jailed, and tortured and executed in some of the regions with the more autocratic regimes like Iran that has a sort of a massive execution plan. But then the report is naming something that it is extremely important and troubling for us to think about it. They say that there is an entire cohort of activists throughout the Middle East region that now is becoming generation jail. Since the start of the civil war in Syria in March 2011, approximately 118,000 individuals have been arrested or forcibly disappeared. In Egypt today, there is an estimate of 60,000 political prisoners. And they remain in jail, most of them since 2011. And many are subjected to, and this is the term that this report is using, an assembly line of torture. That mostly these are one day will be known as crimes against humanity. Israel has approximately 5,500 Palestinian prisoners and security detainees. Turkey, around 50,000 individuals that are arrested since especially the coup attempt of 2016. A lot of them journalists, activists, students, and majority of them also Kurds. And in Iran, that maintains its crackdown on dissidents and activists of all kinds. I think as Jeff and Marsha talked about, journalists, social media activists, students, filmmakers, musicians, women and men that are languishing in prisons in Iran. You may want to check that an online statistics on the situation of political prisoners in Iran, and certainly Nasrin Sotoudeh has been highlighted, that there is an Iran Prison Atlas, that they say that currently there are 626 political prisoners in Iran, 178 of them are Kurds. Now, let me give you an update of the situation of the Kurds. The detention of the Kurds in recent months. that now this information is more, what I'm giving you is more updated than what is available on Iran Prison Atlas. Over 500 Kurdish women and men have been arrested in this year, 2020. And at least 159 of them were subsequently sentenced to prison terms ranging from 1 month to 17 years, and 4 received the death penalty. According to UN Special Rapporteur on Iran, Kurdish political prisoners charged with national security offenses constitute a disproportionately high numbers of those who received the death penalty and are executed. In 2020, at least 4 individuals from Iran's Kurdish minority were executed following grossly unfair trials related to their alleged involvement in armed opposition. In 2020, all prisons in Iran experienced outbreaks of COVID-19. And under this condition, women, Kurdish women like Zainab Jalalian and Sumaya Kargar, they are also moved to Qarchak prison, as was again mentioned by Jeff and Marsha. And they are now in the same prison as Nasrin has been. And then among others that have been detained since October 2020, we have Nahid Taqavi, Mehran Raouf, and many other young women activists that have been arbitrarily detained in Tehran's Evin prison. So what I have outlined so far are available known facts. What is missing is the transformation of these facts by the left to sort of initiate and forge international solidarity. Let me quote from a recent piece by Angela Davis, who writes, "During the time that I was in jail, which was 18 months, she was in prison for 18 months before her release in 1972. She says that I asked that the name of the campaign to be changed from National United Campaign for Free Angela Davis to National United Campaign to Free Angela Davis and all political prisoners." And then it continues that was an important move, because when my individual case was won, no one assumed that the struggle was over. Indeed, we went on to build broad campaigns to defend political prisoners, movement against the Ku Klux Klan and their promotion of racist violence, and then also creating explicit campaigns against police violence. In the context of today, an international abolitionist movement to free all political prisoners in the Middle East is urgent. And my last point, the third one. What do I mean by international abolitionist movement? By this, I don't mean limiting the effort in sort of the traditional prison abolishment. It rather means to understand and relate abolitionism to the abolishing carceral capitalist imperialism. I'm not using these concepts as metaphors or in a rhetorical polemical manner. I'm naming the condition of the world as we live it now. I'm speaking about a global condition and relations which has, like the COVID virus, infected, infiltrated all aspects of our lives and our relations. Just a glance through the history, the recent history of the Middle East, since the first Gulf War of 1991. Occupation of Afghanistan by the US and the occupation of Iraq. The US intervention that created protracted wars, destruction, imprisonment, and let's not forget the atrocities that were committed in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay prison. The intervention created the rise of neoliberal, predatory, corrupt capitalism. And all have happened with the support of the US imperialist power, in particular in its rivalries with European, Chinese, and Russian imperialisms. The very real material condition opened the gate for emergence of authoritarian fascist regimes throughout the world. The Trump fascism was not a national phenomenon, and anti-fascism cannot be a national project. As much as Trump fascism emboldened the rise of fascism globally, every emergent fascist political struggle political structure also strengthened the presence of fascism in the US and elsewhere. Now, earlier this afternoon, I heard on a webinar discussion of the recent arrest of the Kurds in Iran, which is now called tsunami of detention. One issue that was raised, and I think is relevant for our discussion on this panel, and that is the relationship between this tsunami of the detention and arrest, which I can say that this tsunami is throughout the Middle East, and but in particular within in Iran, the relationship between this tsunami and the prospect of negotiation between the Islamic regime and the Biden administration. I don't intend to end, my brief talk here on this complex matter, but I want to say these things. First, to stop the brutal US sanction on Iran, we cannot separate the demand for stopping this sanction from freeing Nasrin and all political prisoners and the stop execution in Iran. Second, to demand freedom for all political prisoners is not separated from demanding freedom of expression, assembly, full and meaningful participation of men and women in society, culture, politics, for women, stopping the forced veiling, separation and demanding separation of the state and religion. I can go on and listing more demands. The point is that all these demands are related to abolishing the totality of this theocratic capitalist regime by people of Iran, and which its presence on the presence of this regime in the international scene is a strengthening and emboldening the fundamentalist capitalist imperialism everywhere, in particular in the United States. So I think that this is very important, that we respond to the cry and the struggle of people in the region, the way that the entire world, and especially people out of the Middle East, have been responding to the movements in the US, such as the Black Lives Matter. When the knee of the police officer went on the neck of George Floyd, the entire people of the Middle East recognized it, felt it. They also wanted to, they were also crying for breathing, because that is what the US has been doing to them for way too long. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Shahrzad. And we're going to move on to our next speaker. And that is going to be a special video from Mariam Claren. She's going to be talking briefly about her mother, Nahid Toghavi, who is a dual Iranian-German citizen. And she was arrested in October of 2020. And She is an architect, a women's rights and freedom of expression activist, and her cause is a cause for all who strive for justice and for a better world. So we're going to play that video right now, and let's go with that.
First of all, I want to thank Marsha Ross and Jeff Kaufman for shining a bright light on the heroism of Nasrin Sotoudeh, and through her story let the world know what is happening in Iran. Like Nasrin, my mom, Nahi Tagavi, is a political prisoner in the Islamic Republic of Iran who fought for the rights of other human beings. By their words, people like Nasrin and my mom set an example to care about other people, about the world we live in, and to struggle for the world to be a better place. My mother is 66-year-old with high blood pressure and other serious medical needs. She had moved us from Iran to Germany in 1983. Since 15 years, she's commuting between Germany and Iran. On October 16, 2020, my mom was taken away by the security guards from her home in Tehran. The security guards used ambulances to cover their act of kidnapping my mother. Since then, she's being held in a Wien prison, isolation section 2A, under the control of the Revolutionary Guard, and the reasons for her arrest have not been disclosed. She has no access to a lawyer and no consular support despite her German citizenship. For several weeks, we don't even had a sign of life. She was not allowed to call. At the 100th day of her detention, her brothers were allowed to see her, separated by a pen and in the presence of the Revolutionary Guard. They talked to her for about 30 minutes, then my mom was blindfolded and taken away by a guard. The prosecutor's office is refusing her choice of lawyer. They told my uncles that only a certain number of lawyers trusted by the government can see the files. They also said my mother's case will not be brought to court until she confirms her charges. This is ridiculous and shows a court case has no real value in Iran. The prisoner is placed in solitary confinement for months, broken through brutal interrogations methods, and forced to make false confessions. Unfair trials and arbitrary prison sentences are the results. As a daughter and as a human being, I want to be the voice of the voiceless. Everywhere in the world, the political prisoners are in prison because they cared for the people who are hungry, deprived, forced to work in almost slave conditions, because they cared for environmental destruction, which makes everybody suffer. And most of all, those who are already deprived, because they defend the people as lawyers, writers, artists, poets, because they organize protests against national and women's oppression. In short, because they challenged in many ways the way these rulers are destroying people and the earth. Political prisoners are people who have large hearts and broad minds because they lived their lives for people and not just for themselves. I started the campaign Free Nahid to raise awareness about my mother's arrest. On change.org, Freedom for Nahid Tagavi, you can sign up and find updates for her case. I thank you very much for inviting me. I wish freedom for all political prisoners. زندانی سیاسی آزاد باید گردند.
Okay, well, we're very happy that we were able to have that video statement sent in to us for this special program from Mariam Claren. And we are now going to introduce our next speaker, and that is Karen Deutsch-Karlakar. Karen is the director of PEN America's Free Expression at Risk programs. And Karen has almost 2 decades of experience in global free expression, press freedom, and individual and human rights issues. And I wanted to say something by way of introduction about PEN, because many in our audience may not have heard of PEN. PEN, as the organization likes to say, operates and exists at the intersection of literature and the battle for human rights. And with that, I want to bring Karen to our viewing audience. Karen?
Thank you so much, Raymond. And thank you also for inviting me to join you all today. As Raymond said, my name is Karin Deutsch-Karliker, and I'm the Director of Free Expression at Risk programs at PEN America, which basically means that I manage a lot of PEN's advocacy and assistance work on behalf of writers, journalists, and activists around the world, many of whom are facing imprisonment and other consequences as a result of their free expression and activism. PEN America's inaugural Freedom to Write Index, which we released in May, found that Iran ranks in the top 5 countries globally in terms of the individuals jailed for their expression. Dozens of dissident writers, creative artists, journalists, academics, and thought leaders, and even ordinary citizens have been targeted, joining thousands of other political prisoners currently languishing behind bars. Some, like Nasrin, are facing sentences of more than 10 years in prison, which is a grossly disproportionate response to creative expression, peaceful advocacy, and resistance to political or social orthodoxies. The situation for political prisoners has become even more urgent, as we've already heard during the COVID-19 pandemic, as detainees have become infected, have faced long periods of isolation and separation from their families, and legal proceedings in their cases have also stalled because of the court system not functioning up to full capacity. And you can learn more about many of these cases by exploring PEN's Writers at Risk database. For the past 6 months, since she started a 46-day hunger strike on behalf of all prisoners that has gravely impacted her health, PEN America has been engaged in an intense advocacy campaign on behalf of Nasrin Sotoudeh. We first honored Nasrin with our 2011 Freedom to Write Award, and during the periods of her imprisonment since then, we've worked with partners, including Jeff and Marcia, and many others, to build an international groundswell of support to help win her permanent unconditional release. These earlier campaigns did lead to her release in 2013, which was, a wonderful development. But as many of you know, she was taken back into prison in 2018. So this is a second prolonged period of imprisonment. As part of this effort, we have started a petition signed by more than 100 writers, advocates, and political leaders. We've engaged with members of Congress and the U.S. administration, with European MPs, and with public virtual attention in Nasrin's case. We urge all of you to join the global campaign to help push the Iranian authorities to free Nasrin. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to discussing further in the Q&A session.
All right, well, thank you, Karen, and the work that PEN is doing in behalf of Nasrin and political prisoners, and also I know that you've taken up the cause PEN has of the Iranian Writers Association, which is facing, arrest and suppression as well. And this gives heart to creative people throughout the world. So I want to thank you for that. And we're going to bring on our next speaker, and that is Kaveh Milani. We've talked about the global struggle in solidarity with the political prisoners of Iran, and connections have been made between the fight of people in Iran, the fight of people in the US, and the struggle of people throughout the world. And we're very delighted to have Kaveh Milani with us from Stockholm, Sweden. This is indeed a global battle. Kaveh is a representative of the Burn the Cage, Free the Birds campaign. And he's going to be telling us about this very important effort by friends, supporters, and families of the political prisoners of Iran. And this is a battle from within Iran, the Burn the Cage, Free the Birds, and globally as well. So Kaveh from Stockholm, welcome to our panel today, tonight, out your way, late at night, out your way. So let's hear from you about this very, very important campaign.
Thank you, Raymond, and other organizers of the panel. And special thank to Jeff and Marisa Ross. We really need more things like that. Your team have traveled to a fascist country and meet a lot of fighting beautiful souls and make a wonderful documentary. Documentary clearly shows the fascist nature of the juridical system in Iran. This regime violent repression is not something new. Since the establishment 40 years ago, there has been constant or continuous campaign of terror and suppression waged to crush and subdue years of opposition and rebellion of the people by utilizing all means of repression, prison, torture, execution, and mass execution. But recent mass uprising of December 2017 and particularly November 2019 have been extremely important development. This rebellion oxygenated all of Iranian society and were taken by the fascist theocratic rulers as a potential threat to their whole system. The regime want to make sure that these upsurges do not get infused with the outlook and program of the most radical revolutionary societal change. This repression has intensified since October 2020 to prevent the commemoration of the anniversary of the November 2019 rebellion. This violent repression is still going on. New people arrested every day. The government new campaign of suppression is two-pronged. On one side, search and arrest of political activists with the aim of identifying and breaking up presumed or actual organized revolutionary forces. Therefore, they are making sweeping arrests of all sections of society. On the other hand, there have been mass arrests of all strata of people who have protesting atrocities of this regime, which the government often accused this political dissident of threat against national security or spy of imperialism or conspiracy against national security. This is a fascist ruling class that has wielded a lethal mix of theocracy, anti-imperialist demagoguery, legal and practical discrimination against oppressed nationalities and women, woman securitization of society under the guise of safeguarding Islamic revolution from foreign harm. Shahrzad gave a lot of example what's happening there. I'm giving you some more. During the November 2019 uprising, hundreds of people were killed during street protests. Between 6,000 to 8,000 people were arrested. It's published by many human rights, including Amnesty International. More than 20 people have been executed in the last month, 16 of them Baluchi prisoners who were executed, charged with the threat against the security of the state with no access to a lawyer or a fair trial. The past 3 months alone, more than 200 people have been arrested or detained by the brutal Evin prison authorities. So people are taken off the street and from their homes without even informing their families. Many are taken to unofficial dungeons by the police, and in many cases, ambulances that are supposed to take injured body to hospital are using to take prisoners to prison. The lawyer of The arrested are desperately overwhelmed. The arrested are of all strata of people: worker, student, woman, teacher, lawyer, literate, intelligentsia, of left and liberals, people of Baha'i faith, Dervishi, Sunni Muslims, every Kurd, Arab, Turkmen, Balochi, Asari activist, teacher, artist are considered potential foreign spy and accused of wanting to disintegrate Iran. Add to that, many impoverished youths who constituted the heart of this two rebellion, that is, regime absolutely have nothing to offer but increasingly gallows prison and torture chambers. The fact is that people have no other choice but to stop the machinery of cruel persecution of the masses. In this context, it is crucial to take up the call for burn the cage, free the bed, to free all political prisoners in Iran now. It is imperative for revolutionaries and other social movements in Iran to defeat this and future wave of state repression. And this is a crucial necessary for all just social movements to stop this repression, pure and simple. Well, it is true that today the Islamic Republic of Iran is facing threat from US and other Western imperialist powers, which the regime tries to offset by clinging on Chinese and Russian imperialists. But indeed, this contention, both sides have punished the mass of people to make them choose one side over other, when in fact, none of these two rotten sides have one iota of interest of people in mind. Thus, the securitization of any political opposition also flow from the theocratic nature of this regime, since it considers itself a representative of God. They consider any opposition in its Islamic revolution and its holy leader as a war against God, which according to the Sharia law is punishable by death. Of all of these are written into its fascist laws. It is a regime that imposes anti-scientific superstition and religious ignorance on the people, but buying the most technologically advanced tool for espionage and repression from China, Russia, Germany, France, Sweden, and the other trader of torture and repression, while buying vaccine against COVID-19 from the West is forbidden. It is crucial to confront the attack of the ruling powers who want to destroy the movement for Iran's revolution and its leadership. The cruel and illegitimate nature of the Islamic Republic's class rule and theocracy must be exposed, their repression reversed, and their police state defeated. No mistake here. Our struggle have stacked up against their repression. They want to crush us, but we must send a clear and absolute message. We will not swallow your crime in silence and or our needs. To be sure, the rank of this regime are riddled with conflict, but they are united like a fist against us when they want to crush us. So we who will not accepting this fascist regime undoubtedly have differences among us in various ways, but it is necessary to strive to unite in the face of their repression. We may have differences over various issues. We may have differences among us in various ways, but the necessary to strive to unite in the face of their repression. We may have differences over how we think, how we approach events and affairs, but nothing is more clear than the obvious truth that we must all defend every and all resistant movement against the repression. Any kind of refusal to call out the crime of this regime cannot be justified. Silence in the face of this will have terrible consequences for every decent body and for all just struggle. So, all summarized in one last meaning. We have to fight against any form of oppression and unite to support all the sisters and activists in the struggle. Thank you for the time.
Well, thank you, Nave, for your comments. And we're going to put up a slide now about the campaign to support the political prisoners in Iran. And that is, as people can see, no to US war and sanctions on Iran, free all political prisoners in Iran. You can take a look at that, and you can sign this statement of solidarity and the demand to free all political prisoners. And you can also, and I will talk a little later about this, go to the Revolution Books nyc.org website to learn more about the history of Iran, the history of US domination over Iran, the struggle of the Iranian people. We have a resource kit and the writings of Baba Vakian on the nature of the revolution to put an end to all oppression and exploitation. So people saw that slide, and what we're going to do now, since the question of culture has come up several times in our discussion from the beginning. Jeff and Marcia, they've made this wonderful film. We're going to have a video from the revolutionary Afghanistani artist performing Burn the Cage. So we're going to put that video up now, and then we're going to have some discussion on the panel. So let's see this wonderful video from Shakib Mossadegh.
سلام. آهنگ قفس را به سوزان من تقدیم کردم به تمام زندانیان سیاسی ایران، به خصوص زنان که بخش عظیم از زندانیان تشکیل میده، و همچنان امیدوارم که یک روزی درهای زندان آمریکا هم شکسته بشه و توده وسیعی که در زندان هستن به ناحق روز آزاد باشن، نه به زندان نه به اعدام.
قفس را بسوزان، بیا در خیابان، صداشو بلرزان، تو بنیاد زندان، نه تیر و طناب و نه کشتار آسان، فقط حق انسان، فقط حق انسان. نترسید نترسید، ما همه با هم هستیم، نترسید نترسید، ما همه با هم هستیم، نترسید نترسید، ما همه با هم هستیم. نترسید نترسید، باید آنها بترسند، هستیم در کنار زندانیان دربند. بترسید بترسید ای صاحبان زندان، آمدیم در خیابان بشکنیم قفل زندان. بترسید بترسید ای صاحبان زندان، آمدیم در خیابان بشکنیم قفل زندان. بترسید بترسید، ما همه با هم هستیم، بترسید بترسید، ما همه با هم هستیم. بگو گرسنگان را از گلوله نترسان، بنیاد این نظام را در خیابان بسوزان. من و تو هم صدا با صدای بی صدایان، بشکنیم از خیابان دروازه های زندان. دی اینترناسیونال سولیداریته
All right. So that was Shakib Mossadegh singing Burn the Cage. And I saw in some of the video some swaying of bodies and shaking of heads. This was a wonderful song, and I think it really exemplifies, the spirit of this battle. People are not going to be daunted and intimidated by this regime and all its horrific repression that it's meting out. And it is a call for us to join together, to stand with these prisoners, to stand with the people rising up against this regime, and to make, as I said, common cause with people throughout the world who are fighting against injustice and for a better world. We're going to have some discussion among the panelists. I have some questions and comments, and I'm going to toss some things to people. Also, I just wanted to let everyone watching know we got a piece of information from the distributor of the film, letting us know that it will be available for viewing on demand appropriately on March 8th, International Women's Day. So that's very fitting. And everyone there can watch it by getting a ticket today, but it will be, even more widely available.
Raymond, can I interject something here? Forgive me. The film is available in Canada and the United States right now, video on demand. So you can see it right now. Amazon and iTunes and all sorts of places. Internationally, it'll be available on National Women's Day. So just wanted to make sure that was
No, thanks. Thanks for the further information. So it can be watched widely now in the US and Canada, and then it becomes available. We had people who are watching the show internationally that were exasperated because they couldn't, connect to the film. So
we appreciate their exasperation.
And I will say to you that because we have so many wonderful people from around the world, supporting the film and following the film, that we had a big talk with our international distributor last week to push up the date. So we pushed it up by a full month because of the demand, and we really appreciate that support. And thank you, everybody who's watching.
Yeah, great. Speaking of the film, I just wanted to ask the two of you to say a little bit about the making of the film. I mean, it was not a typical production. It required a lot of creativity, energy, and stealth, if you will, to be able to, put a film like this together under those conditions. I think people in the audience want to hear a little more about, how people were actually involved in the making of this film. It was the two of you, brought it together and had the vision, but it was made inside of Iran. So maybe you could share a bit of that experience and risk that went into making this film.
Sure. And let me just start by saying, we never intended this film to be a critique from America standing in an ivory tower calling out abuses in Iran. We wanted it to be on common ground. And we think an essential message of the film is that Americans should look at our own track record of human rights, and we can't really criticize others unless we're willing to shine that hard light on ourselves and our own very difficult history at the same time. And so that's just an important sort of starting point. But we weren't able to go to Iran ourselves, and if we could, it would not have been a great way to be discreet to have a big American film crew show up and start following Nasrin around. So we had this amazing opportunity to work with these really talented filmmakers in Iran who needed to be anonymous, needed to be private, but believed in what Nasrin believes in and put themselves at great risk. So following her from public protests, to working with clients who were at risk, to going into art galleries, going to a theater production of Errol Dorfman's Death in the Maiden. A favorite scene for both of us is when Nasrin meets her son Nima at school and they walk home holding hands. And there's this camera person who could get arrested just for walking around with a camera, shooting it all. So that was just part of this cross-country connection that it was just so inspiring for the two of us.
Jeff had actually earlier on, he in his one of his previous films about Iran had worked with people over there too, and realized that this could be done. I mean, in addition to capturing so much of her intimate life because people were with her all the time, we would look at stuff, and he kind of often knew, okay, we need this, we need that. And so, he would send notes back to things that he needed people to capture also for creating the narrative. And then, of course, we traveled around the world ourselves and interviewed a number of Iranians in exile.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes there'd be a lag of months or even a half a year or more than a half a year before the footage you were told was coming would actually arrive. And sometimes two shots that you see in the film back to back arrived to us like a half a year or more later. And sometimes it was complicated, like getting those shots of Evin prison that you see at the end when you're hearing Nasrin talk to her husband and children on the prison phone. That involved a lot of logistics to get that shot, but we were very grateful to have good partners.
The other thing too, just one last thing I'll add, it's very challenging to make a film in a language that you don't speak. So, I mean, that's neither one of us speak Farsi. I've learned, as you could see earlier, a few words, but it's not a language we speak. So we would be getting materials. These things would be sort of somehow get out of Iran and get to us. And we would be watching it, and Jeff's process is first, he transcodes, so he logs all the shots. But often we didn't really know what people were talking about. A lot of times we could see, like, you don't know exactly what people are saying. And we worked with some incredible translators here in the United States who transcribed everything for us so that we could eventually sort of build the script based on the visuals and also what people were saying. And then later on, working very closely with our translator and our editor to make sure that, the Farsi and the English matched, because so much of the film all the Farsi is subtitled at the moment in English. Although, by the way, for our Farsi-speaking friends, we made sure that the American VOD on demand is available also in full Farsi. So, the English parts, there are Farsi subtitles.
And why don't you tell people how they can go see the film one more time with the website?
Oh, well, if you visit our website, Nasrin Film, it says watch now. And so, it'll tell you exactly where you can get the film right now, including the theater in New York, which is wonderful that it's still playing theatrical. We're really thrilled about that. But there's lots of ways to watch the film, and we will be updating as the film becomes available in all these other countries.
Yeah, and lastly, just one little thing, which is that we're always going back and forth with different people and different supporters, and often passing on those messages to Reza. And so, for instance, there was just something that happened remarkable a couple of days ago. We told Nasrin's husband Reza about it, and we got an email from Reza yesterday saying, I was talking to Nasrin on the phone today, and I gave her that message. And that idea that, oh my God, we're so connected is just the most powerful thing.
I think one of the hardest things, we've been talking a lot about political prisoners throughout this whole program, and not just Nasrin, but so many others. I think, one of the hardest things is to be forgotten. People disappear into these prison systems, and no one is talking about them anymore. And so, again, as Jeff is saying, being able to have the film become part of a global campaign, and on behalf of Nasrin and other political prisoners, and having that news filter back has kept everyone's spirits, somewhat, elevated.
I wanted there was a question that came in directed at is Karen still here?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. Someone was asking about Nasrin's hunger strike. You had referenced that, and what is the status? What have you been learning more on the conditions that she's confronting in prison?
Yeah, no, I can fill everyone in. I mean, basically, she's done a hunger strike several times, and several times this year, even, in fact, and previous periods in the past. But she undertook a brief hunger strike in the spring of this year, also to basically protesting at the general conditions for all political prisoners in Iran, particularly, as the COVID pandemic was really hitting in the spring. And then that was a shorter hunger strike, but in August, she undertook another strike basically protesting the same issue. And that hunger strike lasted for what was 46 days. So during that, I mean, that's, if people aren't aware, that's an extremely long period to be going on a hunger strike. And, she's not also already in great health. And because of the previous hunger strikes, already had a bit of a weakened system. So, I mean, it was really to the point where, it was sort of touch and go in terms of like her health, her life, everything like that. She was then taken to the hospital. They were giving her some assistance, but she was under, extremely strict armed guard in the hospital, wasn't even able to see her family properly, then was sent back to the prison. So finally, I think because the risk to her own life was so grave, she stopped the hunger strike after 46 days, but it was really at the point of, potential death and the risk of sort of major heart issues. And she still has ongoing heart issues as a result of the hunger strike. So, she did sort of pull back from the brink, but we're obviously extremely concerned about sort of her ongoing health condition and treatment that she needs. And she was really, released temporarily on a medical furlough twice since the hunger strike ended from prison to have some medical attention. But obviously, the best thing for her would be to be released, into even home arrest to be able to recover and recuperate and have the health care that she needs. So. I mean, obviously, Penn and others are pushing for her sort of unconditional release and the dropping of the sentence and all of the charges against her. But as a also happy, of course, with her just being able to be released from prison to be able to get around. So, but it's incredibly hard to do this, and she's still advocating mostly on behalf of other prisoners rather than her own freedom and her own rights. But she's very, very concerned, obviously, with all the other prisoners. I mean, as Jeff has mentioned, she's probably one of the most famous prisoners in Iran. So her case gets a lot of attention, but there are many, many others who, their names are virtually forgotten, except outside sort of the Iranian activist community. So, she's fighting on behalf of all of them as well, and hoping that attention to her case will also help free all political prisoners in Iran. So that is what we and what many of the other organizations are also taking up. So it's Nasrin is an emblematic case, but it's for sure not the only case. And we're hoping by drawing attention to her case that we will be helping all political prisoners in Iran to get their freedom as well.
Thank you. A number of people have sent comments of appreciation to our speakers, and someone said that here you can post your questions and comments in the YouTube or Facebook chat, or email to revbooksnyc@yahoo.com. We've been getting some comments, and someone out at Berkeley said that yes, this is a battle. I'm coming to understand more how this is a global battle, and students are watching and are noticing. And I'm wondering if Shahrzad could say a few things about the role, of students in this period in building, this effort, and in Iran itself, the role of students in the recent upsurge, and how students can be activated, to become aware of and take up this battle.
Thank you. That is a very important question, and the role of the students and educators is extremely important. Let me start by saying that there is a very rich literature, which I will call it prison literature, and prison literature and prison art that are available. And a lot of them are also gradually, but also steadily, are being translated into English. So there are films, there are books, there are memoirs of former political prisoners that constitute a big body of literature, and the students can demand that type of literature to be included in their classroom learning about the history of the Middle East, history of the women's struggle in the Middle East, and overall this tradition of building solidarity. So I think, in fact, the one item that you mentioned, Raymond, The Art of Resistance, is not a book, is not one of my books, but it is a website which is an archive and depository of a lot of that information, from reports to films to visual materials, and then also memoirs. So that is one source that we have.
Yeah, a number of people in the audience have talked about, what they've learned, from, the program tonight, and, more on, what can be done, to act, to spread the word of this. And I wanted to put up the slide once again of the campaign to free all political prisoners in Iran, if that could be put up. I'm hoping. In any case, we'll see that slide again. But at the end of the statement, and that statement is no to U.S. war and sanctions against Iran, free all political prisoners in Iran. At the end of that statement are some concrete things that people can be doing, and this is in conjunction with the broader campaign, what people have been doing, what PEN has been doing, what Amnesty International has been doing, the call for the release of Nahid Tagavi. There are things that can be happening here in the U.S. One, people should be signing this statement and should be circulating it and should be publicizing this and other statements. If the U.S. does take actions against Iran, people need to be in the streets protesting that. The film, Nasrin, there should be mass showings of this film. This is an incredible tool and resource in raising consciousness. Anyone that's seen the film, everyone that's seen the film that I've spoken to, has been deeply moved by it, by her example and what they learn about the conditions, not only in those prisons, but the conditions in Iran. I mean, let's not forget what Jeff and Marcia were telling us at the beginning, and what other speakers have said, that Nasrin is being punished because she stood by women who were fighting for their freedom in the streets, ripping the scarf, the hijab, off their faces, their heads, and this is what we're dealing with, that kind of society and this kind of heroism. And this is something that people can connect with and identify with, the oppression of women, the repressive conditions that they are facing there. And I know Shahzad was talking about the sense of common struggle that was expressed by the people of Egypt and throughout the Middle East, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran, when people rose up over the summer here. This is a common struggle against oppression, and US imperialism is, the dominant force in the Middle East. So there are things that people can do to take up this campaign, this statement, showing this film, actions in the streets if the US, moves against Iran. And these are the kinds of, important initiatives, that can be taken right now.
Raymond, I want to mention something about that too, because the film and all the discussions that we have, it is about Iran, and it is about the struggle that it is happening in Iran. But I really would like to encourage and advocate that through this film, like a mirror, to look at the US imperialism here. And it is about the US imperialism too. It's not only about the atrocities of the regime in Iran, that how these two are interconnected. Understanding of the connection is very important. And I think that as much as this is a call for political prisoners in Iran, it is also a call for understanding the oppressive nature of the US imperialism, the exploitation that it is happening on the US soil, and on how this travels back to the rest of the world. It is not an accident that, for example, one of the executive orders that Joe Biden signed very recently was that the one that it is related to reforming the incarceration system in order to eliminate the use of privately operated criminal detention facilities in the US. There are more than 2 million people that are currently incarcerated in the US. And then there is that executive order in order to just diminish the private, the capitalism, the relationship between capitalism and prison industry complex. So I think it is very important for activists, educators, all of us to understand that this film is also giving us the opportunity to open up this conversation. As much as we are looking at Iran, as much as we need to build that solidarity, we should also look at what is happening in the US, and then also in order to be able to strengthen that the possibility of building or building what I call internationalizing the abolitionist movement in the US. That's what I would like to advocate for.
Karen, you wanted to say something.
No, I was just kind of jumping on what Shahrazad has just said. I mean, I think, in Iran and the US, people, the governments are, treating each other as the enemy, clearly. But I think this film is incredibly important in that it shows a side of Iran that most Americans don't know about or never really get to hear about, particularly if they're just listening to what the US government's sort of rhetoric is about the Iranian government. And it just provides this look into Iran, which is incredibly important in terms of building understanding and solidarity between the people of the two countries. When I went to Iran in 2004, I have to say that the people in Iran were some of the most pro-American and friendly people I have ever met anywhere in the world in more than 80 countries. So clearly there is this hostility between the two governments, but it does not have to be that way at all between the Iranian people and the American people. So I would encourage everybody to watch the film. It's really, aside from a portrait of an amazing woman and activist Nasrin, it's also a portrait of a country, which I think is very important in terms of building understanding in the US of what Iran is really like behind the rhetoric. So I would encourage everybody to watch the film as a first step. And also to, people can reach out to their own congressmen and women, encouraging them not to have a positive sort of diplomatic engagement towards Iran and to call for the release of political prisoners. So there also are avenues by which Americans can, and Europeans and Canadians for that matter, can lobby with their own members of parliament and members of Congress to work on these issues and in a positive way. So that's, aside from social media campaigns and signing petitions, I mean, reaching out directly to government representatives is also a great way to get involved and let them know what your opinion is and to make your voice heard. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Kaveh, are you still with us? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about more about the Burn the Cage, Free the Birds campaign. What is actually happening in Europe, the kinds of support that's being built. Is Kaveh still with us?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah,
are you hearing me?
I know you're with us in spirit, politically.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, Raymond, the thing is, the key is to mobilize mass mobilization mass mobilization. Actually, is what we're trying to do, to spirit the protester aboard and inside to release political prisoners, uniting progressive lawyers, scientists, artists aboard to pressure on European government and regime. It is very important aspect in our struggle, including especially Javad Zarif. He's coming and going, and that is a part of our goal, to pressure to Iranian government, to regime in Iran, to press them. Actually, that is what we want to do.
I just wanted to state that Shahrazad's comments about the interrelationship between the battle against imperialism and taking up the cause of the political prisoners in Iran and throughout the world. This is an important point and something that, people have to learn more about, that in the world today, and this is an analysis that Bob Avakian has made, in the world today, people are confronting two outmoded forces. On the one hand, there is imperialism, US imperialism being the dominant imperial power in the world, with all the international exploitation and plunder of the planet, the wars that it wages, and the suffering that it brings to the people of the world. So on the one hand, there's this imperialist system, that represents utterly outmoded economics, values, and culture, and brings this suffering to the people of the world. And on the other hand, there is this reactionary, religious, woman-hating Islamic fundamentalism that poses as an enemy of imperialism. And this is that theocratic regime in Iran. And it's very important to understand that any resistance in Iran to that regime is immediately dubbed as a national security threat, something that you had spoken about, Kaveh, that people are, accused of, being agents of imperialism. So, you have these two outmoded forces, and this is a dynamic that people are locked into on a global scale. And Bob Avakian has brought forward, a new framework for human emancipation, to make a revolution, to put an end to all oppression and exploitation. And there is a force in Iran, the Communist Party of Iran, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, which is taking up this new communism and applying it under very difficult conditions. And we have the responsibility here in the United States in particular to be building this broad united effort in defense of these political prisoners, and to share all this knowledge that we're putting before people here today, to make use of this film, to awaken people, to the struggle in Iran, and to oppose any more moves by the US in sanctions. And these sanctions, as I've said several times, are not diplomatic niceties. They're not just bargaining chips. This is depriving people of COVID medicines. It's depriving people of basic medicines. It's depriving people of food. And this is how imperialism operates. And the Biden administration, has its tactics to reassert US hegemony in the Middle East. And we have a responsibility to see through, those deceptions, and through whatever methods and maneuvers they're going to be employing to maintain US supremacy in the Middle East, to maintain US control over the oil resources in the Middle East. And again, there are these two outmoded forces in the world today. So,
if I could just add one quick thing, Raymond, which is just that I'd be the first to criticize this country in so many ways, but I'm pleased to know that Joe Biden has released a statement on behalf of Nasrin Sotoudeh. Anthony Blinken, the new Secretary of State, has also released a statement on behalf of Nasrin Sotoudeh, and they have expressed an interest in going back to the nuclear accords, which could be a bridge towards other positive steps as well. I'm not being Pollyanna-ish, but let's give them a little bit of time to see if they can come forward on those promises. And lastly, just to say that I can't tell you how many times I talked to Nasrin, and Marsha and I talked to Nasrin prior to her arrest in 2018, where we would apologize for something that our government had just done. And one of the things we would say was that there are forces in this country who are quote unquote conservative forces that opposed Iran, but they're in this weird partnership, this weird dance with the equally conservative forces in Iran. And they both have in their political advantage to create conflict between our two countries. And so we have to find a way past the shackles of those who want conflict to find some way to move forward. And let's hope that this new administration can crack open that door.
Well, we are going to have more discussions in panels about US imperialism, in the Middle East, and, what the new policies of the Biden administration will mean. But I do want to underscore and unite that any and all, efforts to free Nasrin, must be, embraced. And as I said, we have to have more discussion about these questions, where the Biden administration is going, how it is fighting for the interest of US imperialism. And that's another discussion to get into. But I really want to emphasize, that we have to welcome, efforts from different quarters, to free Nasrin, but to link her case, as several of our speakers, Karen and Jeff and Marsha and Shazad, have pointed out, and Kaveh, that Nasrin Sotoudeh is Nasrin, this heroic woman who has made enormous sacrifices, and she's also the symbol of resistance and the battle against repression. So I think if anyone wants to make any closing comments, and then I'll close out our panel. I found this so inspiring and so enlightening. If there are any other comments, I'd like to hear from people briefly, and then I'll just close it out.
I want just to say something, Raymond, is okay? Well,
yeah.
We talk about the horrible situation the prisoner have in Iran. I will give you an example. A student, Somaye Karegar, she was student, philosophy student in Tabriz University. She has very rare eye disease and without medicine, and she will be blind, and she cannot get medicine from families. She had been containment, solitary confinement 3 months. That is what they are living. Very, very terrible situation. So I want just to name here because heard about her in the newspaper lately. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I was saying thank you. And if there are any other closing comments from our panelists.
No, just thank you so much for having us today. It was wonderful to meet Kaveh and to see Shahrzad again.
Corinne.
And of course, Corinne, who's been a great friend to this project from really very, very early on. So thank you for having us. And if you haven't seen the film, I encourage you to see the film, and we'd love to hear from people. You can leave us a message on the website, or let us know what your thoughts are as well.
Me too. Thanks, everybody. It is always an important moment for me when I hear other people's effort and ideas. I really appreciate it, and it's always great to see you, Jeff and Marsha, again. Lovely to see you, and thank you so much, Kaveh and Karine, and also thank you, Raymond, for facilitating, and thank you, Revolution Books, and all of our audience. It was just an amazing panel to have, and have this chance to have a conversation, which I think that it's not closing, it's actually beginning of many important other conversations that we need to have. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you. And people can watch the film, take up this campaign. And I want to invite everyone to visit Revolution Books in Harlem and Revolution Books in Berkeley, to come to our website at revolutionbooks.nyc.org and revolutionbooks.org. That's in Berkeley. So people should come, and people should donate and support this bookstore and become part of the life of this bookstore. Revolution Books is a unique space, a unique institution, a unique bookstore. It is the political, intellectual, and cultural center of a movement for an actual revolution. This is a bookstore that values the critical thinking, the poetic spirit, and the unfettered search for the truth. And the beating heart of this bookstore, what animates its life, is the new communism developed by Bob Avakian, which is the scientific method and approach to understand the world, to deeply understand this world, and to make a revolution to emancipate all of humanity. And Bob Avakian has this wonderful new statement that you can find on our website, a New Year's statement for a radically different world to emancipate all of humanity. And I encourage people to read that. And let me just end by saying, free Nasrin, free all political prisoners in Iran, heroism for our times. Thank everyone on the panel. Thank our viewing audience for their attention, for their questions and their comments. And I look forward to more panels like this in the not so distant future. So again, I want to thank everyone and good night, and we'll see you again.